Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eugenie Birch.
Wasn't that the best speech you just heard? Doesn't that make you proud to be a New Yorker? Absolutely terrific. Let's have another hand for Alicia. But now we're going to challenge. We're going to challenge her and you, because we're going to talk about other cities of the world. We think New York is the best place in the world, but there are other ones out there. And in fact, McKinsey told us a couple of years ago, there's 600 cities out there that produce the majority of the GDP. And those 600 cities exist today, but maybe different 600 cities will exist tomorrow. So of those 600 cities, there are 3 we're going to talk to today. There's Hong Kong, there's London, and of course, New York. Will they be the same cities in the same ranking in the decades to come? Now, as you hear them, I'm going to give you a little test, something for you to listen to as our speaker, as our moderator. Greg Clark, our Global Cities Advisor, moderates the panel. And here's the test. The World Bank does a study of the ease of doing business, and it's ranked these 3 cities, I'm not going to tell you which one, 2, 4, and 10. Where's New York? We know that these cities contribute to their GDP. Of these 3, the national GDP, of these 3, there's a range. One contributes 9%. At the other end of the range, one contributes 22% of the national GDP. Where's New York? And the third question I have for you to listen for is, these 3 cities have economies larger than other economies in the world. Of these 3 cities, one is 13th, one is 20th, and one is 35. Where's New York? Let's find out from our speakers. Please welcome Greg Clark and the panel for the 3 greatest business cities of the world, how to keep them competitive and affordable.
Jeannie, thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get to the speakers and the data, how many people have been to London recently? Please raise your hands. Thank you. How many people have been to Hong Kong recently? Please raise your hands. Anybody been to New York recently? Okay, very good. Biggest challenges facing you in New York, I'm going to ask you to vote once only. There's housing, transport, jobs, and resilience. Housing? Okay, that good. Transport? Jobs? Resilience? Okay, overwhelmingly housing has won that vote. Who are New York's competitors? 3 choices: Chicago and LA, London and Hong Kong, or don't be silly, Greg, New York has no competitors. Chicago and LA? London and Hong Kong? Don't be silly. Don't be silly is narrowly improving its position. Let me introduce our 3 panelists, if I may. Firstly, sitting in the middle is Ben Rogers. Ben is the director of the Centre for London, and quite a few of you know London, but when we look at these numbers, I'm looking at percentage of foreign born. Can you see that number? 37%. Financial centre ranking, 2nd. Global firms 1st. Global investment 1st. International students 99. Sitting next to Ben on his right-hand side is David O'Rear. David is the chief economist of the Hong Kong Chamber of Commerce. Here you can see percentage of foreign born, 37%. In global rankings, 3rd, and 3rd, Hong Kong. And then you can see 18,000 international students. International visitors ranked 1st. Sitting next to Ben on his left is Professor Rosemary Scanlon from the Schack Institute of Real Estate at NYU. Percentage of foreign born, there's a surprise, 37 again. Financial center ranking 1, global firm ranking 2, global investment ranking 4, 61,000 international students. I'm going to ask our 3 panelists to pretend they're doctors for a minute. I want you to take the temperature in your cities, if you will. Ben, if you took the temperature in London today, what would it be?
It would be high, and I think I know what the ailment is as well, which is that the patient's a victim of its own success.
Mm.
Should we talk about that?
Yeah, right. Just say a bit more.
Well, the most striking thing actually is this speech that the Deputy Mayor just gave could have been given about London. I mean, it is extraordinary, how similar these cities are, not just in their population and all the numbers around them, but actually in the nature of their challenges. I mean, like New York, London is on a wave in a way that none of us could have predicted. The advent of globalization and these new technologies are actually advantaging rather than disadvantaging long-established global cities. And London is now, the place that anyone with a bit of money wants to come to visit, to buy property, to study, to invest, and to trade. And that's true insofar as increasingly a huge plurality of the UK's graduates educated elsewhere in the UK, but they moved to London. Then, of course, we've got open borders with Europe, and so we've got a huge number of European migrants coming and from around the rest of the world. And on so many scores, I mean, London really is now, I think even more than New York, the most globalized city, because after all, a lot of New York's economic power comes from its role as the sort of headquarters of the vast US economy. London is pretty much all international. And this is a fantastic thing, of course, and many countries would consider themselves very lucky to have a city with half the power that London has, but it does bring huge challenges of growth, to some degree of social cohesion, but above all, I think of sort of growth. Where do we accommodate the extra 2 million Londoners that we're expecting? How do we build homes for them? The transport challenges, and how do we rise to the challenge? And I'll stop after this. Really, how do we rise to the challenge of the changing labour market, where this is sort of hollowing out of the centre, and increasingly the economy is polarised between fairly well rewarded, high qualified jobs at one end and sort of often quite low income, poorly rewarded jobs at the other, and the sort of squeeze in the middle. And I think that is the sort of the biggest challenge. London, like New York's, always had very high levels of poverty and social exclusion, but what you're seeing, which is new, is the way it's becoming a very, very tough place for people who are on modest incomes, who aren't welfare dependent, but who just simply can't afford the properties, and all the other costs are going up as well.
So the doctor's diagnosis is it's overheating, got a bad temperature, and some of these illnesses look like they might hang around for a while. Yeah? Okay, David, if you were taking the temperature in Hong Kong, and of course everybody watches the news and they know that some things are happening in Hong Kong, how would you take the temperature?
Well, we're having a seizure. Hong Kong is often said to be a business city and doesn't do politics, but we do. About every 10 to 15 years we have a political year, and this is clearly one of them. The issue is about how the next chief executive will be nominated and for the first time actually elected by the people of Hong Kong. And there's quite a lot of controversy over how this has been decided. The decision was made in Beijing, the protests are in Hong Kong, and there is not really much room for the Hong Kong government to negotiate. They did not make the decision, therefore they can't change it. What the students and other protesters don't seem to realize is that we have almost no history of Chinese leadership changing their minds in the face of domestic opposition. So this is in a position that is going to have to wear itself out.
So it's a tactic that's doomed to failure, is it?
I wouldn't go that far. It has changed the tone of discussion. It's put this on the issue on the agenda, that you don't decide these things over the tops of people's heads. And so there is going to be a long-term impact. Unfortunately, it's also causing conventions and exhibitions and conferences to be canceled and tourists to reroute their trips and things like that. Small business is being hurt pretty badly in 3 different districts, but only in those areas. We have a fabulous subway system that we actually didn't have to worry about building it where people live. We built the housing on top of the subway systems, and that paid for the subway system. So we have all the people living on top of, most people living on top of subway systems that allow them to get around even when the streets are blocked. And it's quite a remarkable transit system. The other side of it is I look at the Hong Kong and New York stories, and I say, well, yes, they're very impressive stories. They've got many of the same characteristics, New York and London, as Hong Kong. The difference is we're on that side of the world that still grows. China just reported a 7.3% growth rate in the 3rd quarter. Anybody else would kill for that. Hong Kong has a 3.3% unemployment rate. We have a real critical shortage of labor. To put it in perspective, 130,000 unemployed and 80,000 job vacancies. So it's effectively full employment. We have modest inflation, but our housing is extraordinarily expensive, which is why 47% of our people live in public housing.
Who would like to go to Hong Kong now? Raise your hands. Yeah, okay, very good. Now, Rosemary, if you were the physician of your beloved New York City, what would you say about its current condition?
Well, we offered everybody a cold shower today. 2 months later, it could have been snow and ice.
Yeah.
So, and that was to make both you and Ben feel comfortable. Well,
We appreciate that very much, but neither of us are from Manchester, so it's okay. Yeah.
and it's also to put a bit of deception in front of David, so he won't realize what a hot economy New York is.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I think we're doing fine. And as the deputy mayor did just say, we're having a great recovery in many ways. And as far as I can see, it's still underway. We won't know what peak is until it's passed, but I don't think we're near peak yet. So a lot is going on, a lot more that can come along. We do have certain needs, a lot of needs, but we're also optimistic. It's different from 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago, and that means a lot. And I think we have more resources at the local level to put against. We don't seem to have any at the national level, but at the local level, we seem to have resources, and this is where I look to for the future. But we can pick up on that.
Yes, we can. So let's get immediately into this question about competition and opportunity for the future. I mean, obviously, these 3 cities made their names in the last 25 years when the globalization of finance and business services happened, and these became the 3 command centers. So my question really is, to what extent are these cities competitors with each other, really? And what are the opportunities for the future? Is it more finance and business services, or is it something else? David, would you start?
Absolutely. It's focused on finance and professional services at the global quality level. Hong Kong is delighted to be in the class of these other cities. We were not 10 years ago. We were comparing ourselves to Singapore. Our neighborhood happens to grow faster than their neighborhood. They're in Southeast Asia. It's got more challenges. We're part of China, and that means that we get an inside look at the very fastest growing large economy in the world. So we're now in a position where New York and London in various forms, the New York Stock Exchange and the City of London did separate studies where they said, you know, obviously we are our own competitors. The number 3 is Hong Kong. And so that puts us, you know, on the Asian side of the world, that puts us on top of everybody else. It's a very competitive environment. Companies can move easily. The concept of regional headquarters is dying away and has been for quite some time. But what we're seeing is that you have this cluster of the very finest banks, financial institutions of all kinds, stock brokerages, insurance companies, accountants, lawyers, actuaries, all different high-level professionals from the very top levels of their professions, all clustered within a couple of buildings from each other. And so you can move within that community and get your business done in a way that is far more efficient than almost anywhere in the world.
Okay, so, and for the future, you think more of the same, that Hong Kong is going to service the growth of Asia with finance, with professional services?
Well, we have to keep moving towards the higher value-added services. 25 years ago, we were 40% manufacturing, and now it's closer to 0.4%. Our port is being undermined by the competition from nearby, which other ports near Hong Kong are owned by Hong Kong people. So, you know, are we losing or are we becoming an asset management center? There is an outright management control, if not ownership, in Hong Kong of 1/3 of China's exports. So we are a professional services, a management center, a finance center, a capital raising center. We put $1 trillion into China over the last 35 years, paid for their reform program. And there is no other way to go. We have been we're a doorway. It is a two-way door. We have been the entryway for Western, particularly business, to go into China. but now it's also the doorway for Chinese business and tourists to come out of China into the rest of the world. And they all come through Hong Kong.
Sounds like just the role that London and New York have been playing for the past 50 years. So very interesting. Now, Rosemary, your view, who are the real competitors and what are the opportunities? You know, there's at least 20% of people in this room who are worried about jobs. And we're going to come to housing, by the way, in a minute.
Right. Well, I think, and David gave us a good start in looking at competitiveness, and you have to look at it, I think, by the various industries we have. And in the finance and insurance industries, we're basically all the same companies operating in Hong Kong and in London, you know, pretty much. And that may be true for a lot of the high-end professional services, whether it's advertising or management consulting or, you know, computer brains and what have you. So in these, you know, if we were to look at the air traffic flow between the three countries, we would be finding people moving, I think, from city to city. So in that sense, we're not competitive, and goodness knows none of the three cities are competitive on manufacturing anymore. So it may well come down to, over time, to, first of all, the livability, how we define livability, which will be a different, you know, combination of cost and quality of life and safety, et cetera. And then I think very much on our ability to generate new industries, right? David's just given us a hint of how Hong Kong has morphed in its economic structure over the last 25 years. And then in New York City, we now talk about something that we certainly didn't talk about 25 years ago, which is high tech in all of its various forms. Some of it has come because of sort of a great government you know, base that we're turning out new skilled people. We've always had great engineers and architects in a city like New York, but we didn't always turn out people who knew how to do project engineering. Sure. And that's what Cornell Technion or NYU's CUS project in Brooklyn is all about. So we're into a dawn of a new age. We're very much, we think we're a headquarters city for the whole range of creative industries and creative talent and the attraction of young people now.
So that's very interesting, isn't it? Because if you like, finance and business services globalized 25 years ago, these cities became dominant. Sounds like you're saying the next wave of industries to globalize will be these urban services, these high tech, these digital industries, and these same cities must capture their share. Is that the point?
Very much.
Okay.
Very much.
Ben, how does that ring with you? Who are the competitors when you look from a London perspective, and what are the opportunities for job creation as we go forward?
Well, I mean, London's competing with European cities and indeed its own UK cities, but of course we are competing with two represented here. But I think the nice thought is that this is not a sort of sum-zero game. I mean, with the international market, the global market, you know, expanding so quickly, there's opportunities for all of these cities to expand, and I'm confident that their economies will expand, their populations will grow. So you know, we're competing for an ever bigger market. You know, London was preeminent, or one of the leading cities in financial services. I think that's going to remain an important part of the economy, but it's going to shrink. Business services we don't know about so much, but absolutely there are all these new or newish sectors of the economy. I mean, higher education and research is incredibly important to London. We've got 4, 5, even 6 world-class universities. If you add in Cambridge and Oxford, it is an amazing centre. We've got the creative industries, we've got the future city services, as we're increasingly calling them, the architects and the engineers and so on. And then we've got, you know, the sort of trendy tech sector. And I think, you know, what's interesting to note is the way in which lots of these sort of new and developing sectors, they're taking a very sort of urban turn, aren't they? So, you know, the first generation of digital entrepreneurs were actually, they didn't identify particularly with cities, and they sort of, you know, they wore outdoor clothing, organics, they drank wine. That was all, you know, it was a very sort of country sort of, I mean, it's a trivial point, but it's not a trivial point, actually. Yeah. They drew their sort of identity from California and from, you know, the countryside. And this new generation, you know, they drink coffee, they drink beer brewed in local breweries. They drink, you know, they wear tweed and brogues. They want to innovate and create, you know, in the city.
Okay, I'm not going to ask anybody here who wears brogues. How many of you drink wine? Come on. You see, they drink wine in the cities as well. So,
But they don't make it. They don't make it in the cities.
oh, they don't make it in the cities. Not usually. Although come to my house, I'll show you something. So the urbanization of this technology. Now, Ben, right at the beginning, you said London is a kind of a victim of its own success. It's got sick. And you alluded to the fact that affordability is a key part of that. Let's reflect on that for a minute. I guess I want to know, is affordability an issue across the board? What's the housing piece of that? Is London doing anything on housing that New York and Hong Kong need to know about?
Yeah, so the affordability thing, I think it's huge. And the way that we explain it at Centre for London is you've got a really efficient labour market working just as efficient markets should in the textbook. So that's to say, fierce competition for jobs, driving down wages, and people are seeing their incomes squeezed. At the same time, you've got this completely dysfunctional housing market in particular, but a more general pressure on infrastructure, and a scarce infrastructure, which is putting prices up. And this is happening across the UK, but it's much more pronounced in London than elsewhere. And people are trapped in the middle of this. And actually, in London, it's pretty much all the way up the income scale to the top sort of 3 or 4% has taken a squeeze on their living standards over the last decade. But of course, it's a lot worse for people who've got no discretionary funding. And in London, your housing, of course, has gone up. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it is just, the housing prices are mad. But travel costs have gone up. I mean, we have an expensive public transport system. Childcare has gone up. And utilities have gone up because of the demand on infrastructure. So what we're seeing is a real squeeze on incomes. We've been looking at this group. We're calling them the NDs.
The NDs? The
NDs.
Who are the NDs?
Employed, no disposable income or savings. Hashtag ENDIES, in case you want to tweet it. Yeah. And we are seeing a growing army of these people.
So you've got a Twitter thing for them, hashtag NDs. Okay.
Hashtag NDs.
So if you're employed with no disposable income or savings, please log on and follow the NDs. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of housing, I think there's some innovations that you could do. I mean, what we don't have in London, I don't think you don't have in New York either, judging from what the Deputy Mayor was saying. We don't really have a policy for these people. We have a policy for people who are very poor and vulnerable, and then everything else is left to the market. And I do think we're going to have to sort of look much more at having products, housing products in particular, that work for this group as well.
So Ben, we know that the Mayor of London has got a housing strategy. We've got housing enterprise zones. We've got public land deals. We've got fast-track planning processes for housing. We've got the Mayor identifying 12 opportunity areas where high-density housing is possible. Is any of that working in London?
No. I mean, these ships do take a long time to turn around, and I think we'll see some difference. But in the end, the big thing I think is it's all about money. It's about putting public funds into the infrastructure to unlock areas that currently are not regenerated, and it's about putting public money into housing. And the Mayor wants to do that, but we just have a very, very centralised taxation system in London. Almost all the tax that is raised in London goes to central government to be then redistributed, some of it to London, some of it elsewhere. It is not an effective, and it's a very poorly designed set of taxes as well. So there just isn't the money currently in London that needs to go into building more affordable housing.
I heard somebody say the other day that if you brought forward the kind of investment you're speaking about, it would take 20 years for London to catch up with its housing deficit. Is that right?
Well, I'm sure. But to some extent, the more you build, of course, the more people will come. But
yeah. Okay. David, can we tackle this issue in Hong Kong? So affordability in general, how is that? And housing, what component does that play in people's equation, and how difficult a problem is housing?
Well, we think of New York and London as being the low-cost financial centers. In Hong Kong, you have all of your cost is for the C-suite, for the top end of the global economy. All of your cost is in housing, office space. I don't mind sharing with you, I pay about $10,000 US a month for rent.
A month?
That is not because I'm, overly paid in terms of all these economies. It's because there's a 15% tax rate. There's no tax on capital gains, interest, dividends, anything except salary. So there's quite a lot of savings there in that regard. Live-in help, childcare is one of the issues, $500 a month. Education is always variable in these large cities. You can get pretty good education, you can get also pretty poor education. It's something that can be solved with money. And when we're talking about global cities, one of the things you have to realize is that that very top level that makes it a global city, they're not looking at the cost as much as they're looking at the result. Now, then you also have to consider, well, who's going to put out the fires, arrest the criminals, teach the children, unplug the drains? Those people have to be able to live in the city as well. In Hong Kong, we don't have an option of, well, they'll commute in from 40 miles away, because then you're in a different jurisdiction, a different currency, legal system, judicial system, political system, healthcare system, education system, and so it's really not an option for us. Hong Kong and Singapore both have this problem of very densely populated cities that need to take care of, in Hong Kong's case, an extremely rapidly rising population due to refugees. In Singapore, they solved this problem with public sector housing, where they made a compulsory savings out of your income that could go to your housing, it could go to your education, it could go to your health care, it could go to your retirement. And as a result, they have an enormous population in publicly built housing that own the property, something like 85–90% property ownership. In Hong Kong, we did very much the same thing, but without the confiscating your income, and we simply made it available on a rental basis. So this has these programs have both been going on since the 50s, and the outcome has been pretty much the same throughout this period, is that you have affordable housing for the people who need to keep the city running, and that helps keep down the cost of labor. But at the end of the day, at the end of the career, at the end of the earning power, people in Hong Kong don't have an asset to sell to use for their retirement, whereas those in Singapore do. So we made a mistake in that area in the early days. But it is, it's the nature of global cities. We don't do income equality. These are capitalist cities. You don't do income equality in a capitalist city. It's just not the nature of the beast. So you have to have a way of ensuring that the people you need to keep your city operating can actually afford to be there. At the same time, if you're going to compete at the global level, you have to be able to afford to offer the very finest services, living environments, and opportunities of anywhere in the world.
Thank you, David. So this Singapore Provident Fund, I think it's called, so it's a compulsory bank account that every citizen has, which is part mortgage, part pension, part healthcare pool, part education pool, and you vary what you use the money for at different points in your life cycle. Who'd like one of those? Let's see.
How many of you would like to give 25% of your earnings?
So that's the question I was going to come to. So, firstly, who'd like one of those? Let's have those again. Thank you. Who wouldn't like one of those? Who would agree to pay compulsorily 25% of their income to have one of those? Let's see it.
Pre-tax income.
Pre-tax, yeah? Okay, and who wouldn't? Let's have a look. Okay, a lot of people are not voting because they can see the cameras on. That looked to me like it was about 5-1 in favour of those who voted. Of course, the silent majority are thinking, Singapore. Rosemary, let's come to you, if we may, on this same question. So what are the issues here as you see them in terms of affordability in New York, and what's the role of housing in all of this, and can anything be done about the housing problems in New York?
If we were holding this conversation any time in the last 4 decades that I have been studying New York, there would be some point in any one of those decades we'd be having the same question. Yeah. I mean, the point is, in New York City, we never build enough housing. Right, we have more give than David has in Hong Kong because we do have the metropolitan area. We always have Jersey City.
There's got to be a vote in there somewhere, but we're not going to do it. Okay.
Or will Bayonne be the next Brooklyn? Yeah, yeah. Right? Anyway, so we do have that give. But and what we're looking at, I consider on my most optimistic day, even on today's weather, I look at the situation we're in now as a point on the curve of recovery. we built maybe 30, 35,000 units of housing back in the 2004-2007 period, and then we get the great financial crisis and the problem with the banks, and so we could build barely 5,000 units per year. This is a city of 8.4 million people, say 2009, 10, 11. This year's going to be a little bit better. So again, nobody's repealed the law of supply and demand yet. So, and where, you know, a lot of the money that was available comes in for the ultra luxury and super luxury type of housing at the moment. Meanwhile, our demand has kept going because our population has increased every year since the 2000 census was taken. So we've got demand on it, scarce supply, prices go up. So why am I optimistic? I'm optimistic because this is if this is a point in the recovery and the cycle hasn't peaked yet, then the next logical phase would be for the banks and the mortgage companies around the country to start pouring money into more middle-income housing. We're waiting for the mayor's policy team to come up with what will be their perhaps more affordable housing strategy. But so if the gods are kind to us for the next 5 years, we could see a lot happening. I see a lot of construction for housing around me in Brooklyn. And as I said, there's some in Jersey City. So there's lots of capacity for housing. Even as dense as, say, Manhattan is, I still see lots of opportunities in Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx and probably...
And the other place you mentioned before.
Yeah, so the older cities, say, in North and Westchester counties. So there's give there when the whole market gets itself heaved up and on its feet.
So part of what you're saying is the solutions must be regional.
Yes, and we can look to a regional solution in New York City. That's not going to help the city's tax base, but...
Yeah. We've got 15 seconds each for our last question, which is this. These three cities have one thing in common, a DNA that's about openness, internationalism, trade, enterprise, you know, 38, 39% foreign born. That's the kind of emblem of a global city. Is that the model for the next 25 years, or is that model broken? David.
If I knew what the internet was going to do in the last 25 years, I could answer that question. There's no way of knowing what's coming in the future. The key is information flow, flexibility, and keep the costs down.
Thank you. Ben?
I think it is. I think what's interesting is that London's up for that sort of openness, and the rest of the UK, not so sure.
Rosemary?
I think in a nutshell, it really depends on our ability to take care as a city of our basics. To continue on education, we need to worry a lot more about our transportation systems. And I think to be able to provide sure there's enough housing for all of the creative young people who are pouring into the city, because this will be our future.
Okay, audience, on balance, would you rather live in a global city or would you rather live someplace else? Who wants to live in a global city? Who wants to live someplace else? I rest my case. Thank you very much, Rosemary Scanlon, Ben Rogers, David O'Rear. Thank you.